Marcus Johnson had been in plenty of courtrooms before, but something about this one felt different. It wasn't the towering wooden bench where the judge sat, nor the cold, indifferent faces of the jury. It was the way Judge Linda Hawthorne looked at him, like he didn't belong there. She leaned forward, her sharp eyes fixed on him with thinly veiled disdain. "Officer Johnson," she said, drawing out his name as if tasting something unpleasant, "I assume you understand how to answer questions properly? That is, if you can comprehend what's being asked of you." A murmur spread through the courtroom, but no one dared speak against her. Marcus, standing tall in his neatly pressed uniform, kept his face neutral. He had heard it all before, the snide remarks, the subtle jabs, the coded language meant to remind him that no matter what title he carried, to some people he was still just a black man in the wrong place. But this was different. This wasn't some drunk yelling at him from a street corner or a suspect resisting arrest. This was a judge, sitting in a position of power, using that power to belittle him in front of an entire courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied evenly. "I'm fully capable of answering questions." Judge Hawthorne scoffed, flipping through her papers with exaggerated boredom. "I certainly hope so. We wouldn't want to waste this court's time with incompetence." The defense attorney glanced at Marcus, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the judge. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, but still, no one said anything. The bailiff, a middle-aged man who had probably worked under Hawthorne for years, kept his gaze fixed forward. Marcus had seen this before. The way people stayed silent in the face of power, even when they knew it was wrong. "Now, Officer Johnson," Hawthorne continued, "let's get through this quickly. I assume you can read, so I'll ask you to confirm the details of your report." He nodded, keeping his voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. On the night of January 12th, I arrested the suspect after witnessing an exchange of illegal narcotics. The suspect was read his rights, and all evidence was documented per protocol." Hawthorne tilted her head, pretending to consider his words. Then, with a smirk, she said, "Well, it's refreshing to see that you've memorized your lines so well, almost as if you've had plenty of practice, A few nervous chuckles rippled through the gallery, but Marcus remained still. He refused to give her the reaction she wanted. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he said. Hawthorne's eyes darkened. She didn't like the lack of submission. "Your job," she mused. "Funny. I imagine you're more used to being on the other side of this courtroom." The words hit like a slap. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. Marcus heard a quiet gasp from someone in the audience. Even the court reporter hesitated, fingers pausing over the keys. But no one objected. No one ever did. For a split second, anger surged inside him, hot and demanding. He had worked twice as hard, climbed through the ranks, and earned his badge with sweat and sacrifice. And yet, here he was, being reduced to a stereotype by a woman who was supposed to uphold justice. But then, something unexpected happened. The radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "Dispatch to Officer Johnson. Be advised, arrest warrant issued for Linda Hawthorne. Repeat, arrest warrant issued for Judge Linda Hawthorne. Officers en route to location." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Judge Hawthorne's smirk faltered for the first time. Marcus glanced at the clock. 7 minutes had passed since he stepped into the courtroom. 7 minutes of her insults, her condescension, and in just a few more, everything was about to change. The courtroom, once thick with tension, now fell into an eerie silence. Every eye in the room shifted, bouncing between Judge Linda Hawthorne and Officer Marcus Johnson. The judge's smirk had vanished, replaced by something she rarely showed, uncertainty. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had spent years maintaining his composure in difficult situations, but this was new territory. The same woman who had insulted him just minutes ago, who had openly disrespected him in front of a full courtroom, was now about to face the very justice system she had so often twisted in her favor. The radio crackled again. "Dispatch to Officer Johnson. Confirm you received the warrant details." His fingers hovered over the button on his shoulder mic, but he didn't need to respond yet. He was still standing as a witness, not as an arresting officer. He turned his attention back to Hawthorne, watching her carefully. She blinked rapidly and forced a chuckle, an obvious attempt to regain control. "What kind of nonsense is this?" she scoffed. "I don't know what prank your department is trying to pull, But I suggest you focus on your testimony instead of playing games." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The doors at the back of the courtroom suddenly swung open with force, and two uniformed officers strode in with purpose. The sound of their heavy boots against the floor echoed like a judge's gavel slamming down. "Judge Linda Hawthorne," one of them announced, holding up a printed warrant. "You are under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to tamper with evidence. Please stand and place your hands where we can see them." The colour drained from Hawthorne's face. For the first time since Marcus had entered her courtroom, she looked small, vulnerable. "This is ridiculous," she barked, slamming her gavel down so hard it nearly bounced out of her grip. "I am a sitting judge. You have no right." One of the officers, a tall, broad man who had likely been waiting for this moment for a long time, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we have full authorization from the Attorney General's office. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." Hawthorne's mouth opened, but no words came out. The courtroom was frozen, the audience barely daring to breathe. The prosecutor sat stiffly, his fingers laced together, as if debating whether he should intervene. The defense attorney looked at his client, wide-eyed, as if wondering if this trial even mattered anymore. Marcus took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate, measured. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was the highest-ranking officer in the room, which meant it was his duty to ensure the arrest went smoothly. Hawthorne's eyes locked onto him, and in them he saw something that almost resembled fear. "Officer Johnson," she spat, the last of her defiance burning in her voice, "don't you dare." Marcus looked her in the eye, standing tall, standing proud. "Judge Hawthorne," he said evenly, "you have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked around Judge Hawthorne's wrists, the cold steel a stark contrast to the power she had once wielded in this very room. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by stunned silence. No one had ever imagined seeing her like this. Stripped of authority, hands bound like one of the many defendants she had sentenced without mercy. She stiffened, her face frozen in a mask of disbelief. "This is a mistake," she muttered, her voice lacking the arrogance it had carried just minutes ago. "You don't understand. I'm a judge. You can't do this." Marcus remained composed. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," he repeated, his tone steady, professional. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For years she had spoken those same words to countless people, many of whom had received harsher sentences than they deserved under her biased rulings. Now she stood on the other side of justice, and there was no bench to shield her. The two arresting officers flanked her, guiding her away from the judge's bench. The prosecutor sat in stunned silence, while the defense attorney shook his head as if still processing what had just unfolded. The bailiff, usually the one enforcing order at Hawthorne's command, stood motionless, unsure whether to intervene or simply let justice take its course. As they reached the doors of the courtroom, Hawthorne turned her head toward Marcus. The defiance in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by something that almost resembled desperation. "Johnson," she hissed under her breath, "you think this makes us even?" Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "This isn't about me," he said simply. "It's about justice." The doors swung open, and as she was led out, the courtroom finally erupted into murmurs. The gallery buzzed with whispers, the weight of the moment settling over everyone who had witnessed it. Marcus took a deep breath, his grip loosening at his sides. He had faced countless difficult situations in his career, but this one would stay with him forever. Not because it was personal, but because it was proof that no one, not even a judge, was above the law. The hallway outside the courtroom was filled with reporters, their cameras flashing like relentless lightning strikes. Microphones were shoved forward, voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. "Officer Johnson, did you know about the warrant before stepping into court?" "Judge Hawthorne has denied all allegations. Do you believe justice is truly being served? What do you have to say about her past rulings? Should they all be re-evaluated?" Marcus didn't slow his steps. He had expected this. A judge being arrested mid-session was the kind of scandal that would dominate the news cycle for weeks, and his role in it only added fuel to the fire. He wasn't just any officer making an arrest. He was the very man she had belittled moments before. Hawthorne, now stripped of her former confidence, kept her head down as the officers guided her toward a waiting police vehicle. The cuffs on her wrists were a stark contrast to the black robe she had once worn with absolute authority. As she was placed in the back of the car, she turned once more toward Marcus, her lips pressing into a thin line. It wasn't anger in her expression anymore. It was something closer to resignation. Marcus didn't linger. There was nothing more to say. Justice wasn't about revenge, and he refused to let this moment become personal. He had done his duty. That was enough. Inside the precinct, the booking process was swift. Fingerprints, mugshots, paperwork, all the procedures Judge Hawthorne had watched unfold from the safety of her bench were now happening to her. The reality of her situation seemed to sink in as the camera clicked, capturing the image that would soon be plastered across every news station. As Marcus reviewed the final details of the report, his lieutenant approached, arms crossed. "Hell of a day," he said. Marcus exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Yeah, you could say that." The lieutenant studied him for a moment. "You kept your cool in there. Not many could have done that." Marcus shrugged. "Wasn't about me." The older man nodded approvingly. "Still, it's a damn fine example of justice coming full circle." Marcus didn't respond right away. Justice. It was a word people liked to throw around, but he knew it wasn't always so simple. He thought about the countless people who had stood before Hawthorne, their fates decided by her biases. How many had suffered under her rulings? How many had been dismissed just as she had tried to dismiss him? One arrest didn't undo years of injustice, but it was a start. As he stepped outside, the evening air was cool against his skin. The city moved on as if nothing had changed. Cars honking, pedestrians walking, the world continuing as it always did. But something had changed. Today had proven that power didn't make a person untouchable, that no robe, no title, no position could shield someone from the truth forever. Marcus took one last look at the courthouse behind him before heading toward his car. He had a long night ahead, but for the first time in a while, he felt something close to peace.